Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack, all on the show for the first time in a long time. And we felt like to honor that, we're going to bring on a guest, national recruiting editor for 247Sports, Brandon Huffman. Brandon, thanks for coming on the show. How you doing?
Hey, good to be here. I am striving to get to a Dutch Bros because right now I'm thriving off of Hampton Inn morning coffee. So I need to get some real caffeine in this body of mine.
And the reason why you're in a Hampton is because you were in Eugene. You were with us last night at Saturday Night Live, and that's why we're going to bring Brandon on to get his just overall perspective, his takeaways from SNL, as well as just get you up to speed on recruiting in general. Let's start big focus here, Brandon, from just like the camp perspective. It feels like when this started in 2017 under Taggart, it was a first chance to get like all your commits and all your big targets for that recruiting class that were seniors on campus. Now it feels like it's shifted towards, hey, we want to get our commits on campus, but also it's more of an introduction to sophomores, to even freshmen. I mean, there were, I think, 8th graders going into freshman year of high school at SNL. It really feels like the focus has shifted in the last 6 years that this camp has gone on. I'm sure it's that way across the country. What led to that, you think?
Yeah, I think because the cycle has gotten so much quicker, it's been expedited in terms of when guys take visits, when they make commitments. The focus now has to kind of be on the underclassmen. Who are the 25s, the 26s, and even the 27s. It seemed like the majority of the 24s that were there were committed prospects. And there were still some 24s that are, holding on for hope that there might be an Oregon offer coming. But I think that, when you make the focus of underclassmen, it gives you a year or two heads up because so many guys are committing early now. So many guys are done after the official visit cycle or wraps up in June. So July is a month where a lot of guys are coming off the board. Well, now you might bring in some guys that you're like, hey, we still need a couple guys at this position. Let's bring them in for more workout. But the reality is, everything pivots to the next year. Remember, August 1st is the first day that official offers can go out to the 2024 class. But the reality is those guys already know that they've got official offers. It's the 2025s that are going to be able to start communicating with coaches here in the next couple of weeks. So you really try to pivot, if you're a coach, to the ensuing classes because those are the guys that are still largely uncommitted, still largely untapped and unrecruited. So you get them on campus, get that last look at them before they start their season. And I think it's kind of a win-win for coaches who are already ready by this time of the year to move on to the next class.
Brandon, great having you on here. It was fun catching up with you. Always one of my favorite parts of this gig is meeting with you and the other recruiting guys on the trail. Fun times. Yeah, a little sentimentality. I also like that you're just Huffman on the stream here, which is, I think, appropriate. We're going to get to a bunch of the commitments. Oregon had 9 of them at SNL. There's going to be a bunch of questions about that, but I kind of wanted to start with the 2025 quarterbacks, and there were 2 very good ones on hand with Bear Bachmeier and Achilles Smith Jr. What are your kind of early thoughts on those 2, and then maybe just the position as a whole out west in 25?
Yeah, I mean, those 2, along with Houston Longstreet from Corona Centennial, are probably kind of the 3 crown jewels of quarterbacks out west. We've always seen the West Coast have really good quarterbacks. I mean, you go back a few years ago to the C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, DJ Uiagalelei last year, Nico Amiliaba, Aiden Childs, Malachi Nelson. And, in 2025, there's another strong 3 that's maybe not as top end heavy as the 2020 class was, the 2023 class was, but 3 really talented quarterbacks and 3 really different type of quarterbacks. And 2 of them were there on Saturday night. Bear Bachmeier, who's probably the most consistent passer on the evening. With Bear, it feels like we've been watching Bachmeier's forever, and it's partly because we had. We go back to watching Hank when he was, a freshman in 2015. All the way through Bear now, who's got 2 more years of high school. And then you had Tiger there in the middle between them, even though he's a receiver. Bear just looks so polished. He looks so, everything looks very easy to him. He doesn't force many throws. He makes the smart throw. He doesn't try to force things into spaces that he doesn't have open. And I thought he was the most consistent, but then you watch Achilles Smith Jr. And I got to see him last month at Future 50 down at IMG in Florida. And first of all, he's head and shoulders above everybody from a physical standpoint. His stature, you can't help but notice him. But then you see the ball come out of his arm, and it looks like he's compacting his passing, his motion a little bit more, and tightened that up just even in the month since I last saw him. And I thought he had a couple of really big wow throws. I know, Eric, you and I are standing there watching the throw he made to the back corner of the end zone for a touchdown, and you just kind of like, okay, those are the kind of throws that you want to see from McKeely, where he can make those wild throws, but you also want to see just consistency from him. And I think he is showing that consistency, and you got the arm that he has. Once you kind of, wield the wildness, and it's not that he's a wild quarterback, but when you're a big arm quarterback, you tend to do things that you think you can do maybe a little bit more than you should do because you have the arm strength. And I think as he continues to do that, he's got a chance to be a very special passer.
Brandon, like Eric said, great to see you yesterday. Great to have you on the podcast today. Thanks again for coming on. One of those Oregon recruits or commits that was there at Saturday Night Live was Fox Crater, guy who's been committed to Oregon for a while. Just your initial thoughts from the camp for watching him and his limited drills, and then just an update on his recruitment. There was some talk about maybe a decommit after Adrian Clem left, but he's still committed to Oregon. Just where does he stand as of now?
Yeah, and I mean, you add in the fact that after Adrian Clem left, he took kind of a southern swing of visits where he visited A&M and TCU, Oklahoma, Texas, went down to Alabama and Georgia. And, then in the month of June, he took an official visit down to USC, and he took one to Oklahoma. And so then there was a speculation, is this thing even getting softer? Well, he took his last official visit to Oregon at the end of June, and I think that solidified his standing with the Ducks. I think Alik Terry's done a really good job of developing the relationship. Another ace in the hole, even though he's not an in-state kid, I've always counted Vancouver kind of as an Oregon city rather than a Washington city. So he's almost, a local kid. But two of the guys that he trains with, that he does 5-on-5 with, are Trent Ferguson and Devin Brooks, who are both in-state committed after Fox committed. But I think the familiarity with both Devin and Trent, certainly helped. Seeing Fox, it's funny because every time I see him, I remember going back and watching him, and he was early in his sophomore year, and you saw the size. He was a basketball player. You saw the size, and you just kind of thought, all right, he's raw, but once he learns this position, he's going to be good. Junior year, I went to go watch him play in an absolute rainstorm. He was just okay, but then I got to see him in February at a lineman camp, and he was just coming off of hoop season and looked to be in great shape. He's already got the flexibility, the bend that you want, but he looks stronger. He looks nastier. He looks like he's really taken to the training and the coaching he's gotten from Christian Swain up there at Evergreen. And he's a guy that I think the sky's the limit for him. He may not be a guy that's going to come in and play right away in 2024. And you kind of don't want that when you recruited the offensive line position as well as Oregon has. Yes, they've had some attrition, but you kind of hope that you can give him a year, maybe two, to just get stronger, because he is a little bit on the slider side for a tackle. But man, there is so much upside to like, and just watching him in the drills. And here's a guy that's committed. He's got offers from all over the country. There's no reason for him to even participate, let alone participate at a high level. And I thought, in the early going, especially when we got to see the offensive lineman right in front of us, I loved his energy. I love the fact that he wasn't skipping reps. He'd get out there and he'd do it. He just looks even bigger than he did, 2-3 months ago. And so I think the sky's the limit for Fox, and he continues to trend up for us.
Would you? Sorry. I was gonna ask a follow up. Just what do you think of his hair?
Fox has always had a beautiful set of hair. It's not quite. When you look at, maybe was it Noah Thomas, the other kid from Vancouver who was there in 2025. But Fox has got good hair, and I'm used to seeing him rocking his Bass Pro Shop hat, and that was something that a lot of quarterbacks were wearing on the 7-on-7 circuit, and it kind of looked out of place on quarterbacks. But when you see this big old offensive lineman, his dad lives in Texas, and you see him rocking the Bass Pro Shop hat, it fits, but it does keep the world from getting to see those locks.
We have photos, by the way, on duckterritor.com of Fox and his nice haircut. Was it kind of braided in the back? It was a good look. I agree.
Cornrowy, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. I was going to ask you about a name you've already mentioned, Brandon. Trent Ferguson. I was admittedly really intrigued to see him in part because he's a local kid who I hadn't seen yet, and also because this is a guy who's got very limited football playing experience, still very raw. I think that kind of showed up at times on Saturday, but what were your impressions seeing him? And I guess just how many times have you seen him before this? And what kind of growth had you seen since maybe the last time?
So this is the fourth time I've seen Trent since February. And I tell you, every time I see him, it sounds cliche, but in his case, it's really accurate because he is still new to the game of football. He didn't play but I think 4 games last year. He was a basketball player, got his offer from Oregon, about 10 days after he played his first high school game. And it was almost by happenstance. West Salem was playing Sheldon High School. Adrian Clem went to go watch his son Nico. Tony Tuioti went to go watch his 2 sons on Sheldon. And, shortly after, they invite Trent to come to camp. Come to campus for an unofficial visit and for a game, and ended up offering him. And I think he's one of those guys that, you don't take him right now and expect him to play right away, because he's not ready to play right away. You take him and you take that raw athleticism and that athletic ability and that length, that frame, that size, the nimbleness of his feet. You teach him how to play football for the first 2 years that he's there. And then in 2026, he'll probably turn him loose. And one of the nice things I think college coaches will say this all the time, that they love about guys that are relatively new to the game but have an advanced skill set athletically because they play other sports, is they don't have a lot of bad habits when they don't know the game all that well. They're not teaching them something that they were taught the opposite of by maybe their high school coach or maybe by their private trainer. They're able to kind of teach them in real time, and they don't have a lot of bad habits to change. And so when you look at Trent, you don't see a lot of bad habits. What you see is a guy who's still relatively new to the game, who's still learning certain things, but the things that you can't teach, that physicality, the flexibility, his ability to bend bend with the knee, not be a waist bender, just his footwork that you can see coming from the basketball side of things. Those are things you can't teach. You can teach him the other things when he gets to college, just the technique, the way to use his hands, the way to use his arms, and all the different things that come into being an offensive lineman. And you're going to spend 2 years putting good weight on him and make him stronger. But, having seen him in February, where you're just kind of like, there might be some things here that we hold up on, to seeing him in April to in June to now, that light bulb's going on. And the other thing I love about Trent too is he knows that he's got some learning to do at the position. And so he hasn't ditched or ducked going to camps, no pun intended, but he's going to these events and he's showing that he wants to get better.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Seeing these guys that are 2024s show up and take part in drills, and whether they're committed or not. Brandon, we've talked about 2 commits already. 7 other guys were on campus. One of those was Sandman, a 2025 offensive lineman from Florida. I'm going to throw in Jason Brown and also Dakota Fields, 2 other 2024 guys that aren't committed to Oregon. Brown's uncommitted, Fields is to USC. Of that group, anything stand out, good or bad? Did anything catch your eye?
Yeah, well, Dakota Fields would have been cool to see him work out during the day. I thought that the defensive backs group was loaded, and they would have just added to the talent level. I thought that by far was the best group, and probably because it was the biggest group. But just getting him on campus if you're Oregon, it's got to be super, super exciting. Given that this isn't an official visit, this is him coming up on his own dime after he's committed to USC. And we know Oregon was a factor in his recruitment before his decision. And, he's got a little buddy named Roger Pleasant that is in Eugene. So that certainly doesn't hurt. So I think just getting him there, we were joking about last night, like a lot of those top guys come and they spend the entire time walking around doing the event. And the coaches spend basically 2 hours doing an in-home visit with them on their on campus. So, that certainly wasn't something that, Oregon was bummed about getting him there. And while Demetrius Martin was coaching and giving pointers and doing that, I guarantee you there was time spent with Dakota. So that was big. Jason Brown, on the other hand, I thought he was the best running back there. I thought he looked explosive. He looked dynamic. He caught the ball well. Jason's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I've noticed since he was in middle school. He was one of my son's teammates, and just watching him, get out there and compete. He's a little bit dinged about how his stock has dropped in terms of the rankings over the last year. And, he will be the first one to tell you that maybe my junior season wasn't as good as my sophomore, my freshman year was, but now I'm coming back with a whole new mentality. And here's a guy with offers from all over the country, doesn't need to be at a camp. And yet he drove down to participate in this camp. And he looked like he was one of those guys that was taking this camp like it was a game on a Friday night for the Metro League title. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of smiles, and Jason Brown is the most gregarious personality you're going to find in this 2024 class. And it was all business for JV on Saturday night. I thought he looked extremely good. And, if that was kind of a sneak preview to what he's going to look like as a senior at O'Day, then I think the Metro League should really be on notice, because he played with a purpose at a camp where a lot of guys just kind of go through the motions, and that wasn't like him at all. And I think that, just seeing again, we talk about guys that steal reps, and I say that in a good way, where they're not just content to get a T-shirt and a picture. They came to the camp to compete, and I think that Jason certainly came to that camp to compete, and I thought he looked as good as I've seen him at any event in the last year.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to dive. Oh, Jared, do you have a follow-up?
No. Just waiting for the break.
You raised your hand. All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Brandon Huffman. All right. Welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Halfway through the show. Really appreciate your time, Brandon. We'll get you out of here real quick.
Real quick, just right after asking you some more questions. I spent a majority of the time on the 1v1 side of the ball, but I just thought I just want to get some takeaways from you, and just what you saw in the 7-on-7 portion of this whole Saturday Night Live camp, and just guys who stood out, whether it's offense or defense, maybe a quarterback or two. I just wanted to get some takeaways from this camp from you.
Yeah, it's always funny because we talk about this all the time in the industry, that 7-on-7 is not a great venue for linebackers a lot of the time, because quarterbacks are trying to throw the ball deep. They're trying to show off their 40 to 50 yard motion and range that they can do. So there's not a lot of dinking and dunking or underneath routes. And yet, with the way there was so much going on Autzen Stadium's field, with the linemen in the middle of the field, reps on one side, reps on the other, the 7-on-7 wasn't necessarily giving them a full field the entire time. So they were getting to work in smaller spaces. So that meant a lot of checkdowns by these quarterbacks, which allowed the linebacker group to really have a good day. I thought Jackson Jones, that was my first time seeing Jackson Jones in person. Another one of those guys. He was not ditching reps, man. That kid was jumping in there, jumping out of there, jumping back in there, jumping out of there, jumping back in there. I mean, he probably it felt like he took 100 reps. And, I thought he had a really good day, moving well in space. And then no relation, but a 2025 linebacker, Marco Jones from San Ramon Valley in Danville. Love that kid. I've seen him at a number of 7-on-7 tournaments and camps. I've seen him at the Under Armour camp, saw him at the OT7 last month. Here's a kid who basically spent the entire summer playing baseball all over the country. He's going to the area code games later this summer. So, he's mixing football and baseball, and yet he came up, he competed. I know Oregon's very high on his list. This is, I think, at least his third visit to Eugene. He was up for the spring game and then was back last night. Thought he had a really good day. Jonathan Epperson, a kid I'm very familiar with, lives in my neighborhood, plays on my son's high school football team. I just love the energy that Jonathan brings, but his ability to close. I mean, he looks more like a safety from a physical standpoint, but he's going to be a linebacker in college, and his closing speed was tremendous. I thought Mark Iannachor also looked really well, looked really good. The 4-star linebacker from Narbonne High School in Harbor City, Los Angeles, and then Keelan Moses from Louisiana. I thought he looked really well. So that was one of those rare events where I walked away going, man, the linebackers really made some plays. But as I mentioned, the DBs I thought had the best day, the best group overall. Aaron Flowers had one of the best interceptions that we saw. He might have had the interception of the camp on a pick. The future Duck, I thought he looked really good in the drills. Again, we talk about how guys can go through the motions a little bit when they're out of camp, and especially when they're already committed, but he did not at all. There was a couple of kids that school, St. Francis Academy. Okay, I remember they were both teammates from Baltimore, Michael Van Buren's teammates, that I thought just looked outstanding. Blake Woodby, Kevin Humes, I thought both flashed. I thought Woodby had probably a little bit better of a day, but Kevin Humes, I think he might, physically have a little bit more upside with him. But I really like both those guys coming out to the West Coast to perform. Kid that I've seen a ton this offseason, De'Arian Clemens. He's the number 4 player in the state of Washington, out of Spanaway Lake High School in Spanaway, Washington. He ran a 4.3 laser time at a combine earlier in the spring, but he's shown he's not just about straight line speed. He's got the hips. He can flip those hips. He can get out. He takes a bunch of reps. And then, get used to hearing this name, folks. If you haven't already heard this name if you're a early 1990s Oregon fan, you know the last name. If you followed recruiting in the 2010s and the teens, you know this last name. But you're going to be hearing this name a lot for the next 4 years and probably beyond. And that's Josiah Molden. I mean, you look at this group of guys. There's 24s there. There's 25s. There's 26. Josiah is a very quiet, very humble kid. But then you see him on the field, and he's in there taking reps like he's a fifth-year senior in college. Mm-hmm. He is, an NFL vet, and he doesn't have a lack of confidence. You go in there, he'll go up against the big, tall receivers. He'll go up against the smaller, shiftier, quicker slot receivers. And he will hold his own, if not continue to excel. So that's a kid who, be very excited about if you're an Oregon fan. Talking to a lot of the Westland coaches, Damon Griffin, former Oregon receiver, goodness gracious, I'm completely blanking. Anthony Newman, another former Oregon DB. I mean, when you bring up the name Josiah, this is back in the spring when he was still in middle school. You bring up the name, and it's just like an instant smile comes to their face. And, what he lacks in age, he makes up for with a confidence that he can compete at a high level. And just seeing him out there yesterday with a group of very experienced, very mature defensive back group, I thought Josiah was one of those guys that, you're going to be talking about after last night, and we'll be talking about him a lot the next few years.
All right, Brandon, let's consider this a delayed follow-up because you did mention and do a kind of a scout breakdown on Jason Brown, but I'm curious on his recruitment in particular because as we've established already, a lot of the kids on campus here were 25, 26s. You mentioned you're just talking about a 27, and there are only a few 24s that aren't committed to Oregon that were here, but Brown was one of them. Kind of, is Oregon the leader, one of the leaders? Kind of where does it stand, and what's your sense on just kind of a timeline maybe?
Yeah, I would say that they are probably in that top two right now. I think Michigan State had him on campus for an official visit in June. He had taken an unofficial visit there back in April. So he's been to East Lansing a couple of times, really likes it there. But the reality is, Jason Brown's a Northwest kid. And I think, if he had the opportunity to stay in the Northwest, then that's something that's going to certainly come in handy. And Oregon specifically asked him to come and to work out, and they just want to spend some time with him. He didn't do a lot of camps in the off season. He did the opening the all 22 Elite 11. He went down and worked out at that, but because again, going back to just kind of the angry Jason Brown about his rankings, it was all about O'Day High School. He's a guy that really excels in pads. So he spent a lot of this offseason working out with his team, even playing some quarterback in a pinch when he needed to. And so as a result of that, he didn't do a lot of official visits in the spring or unofficial visits for that matter. He took a visit down to USC. He was at Oregon, I want to say in January, and then he visited Michigan State before he took the official. But Oregon is right there in the mix for him. He's been to Eugene a number of times, really developing a good relationship with Carlos Loughlin. I mean, you got to go back to who was the running backs coach before Carlos Loughlin? That's who offered him.
Jim Mastro
at Oregon. Jim Mastro. There you go. Sorry, Coach. I forgot. So much coaching attrition in college football. I can't remember who was where, but his recruitment goes back to the spring of his freshman year and the spring 2021 COVID year, and he got offered by Oregon then. But he still continues to be on their board, and they're making a push for him. So I think Oregon is a very compelling opportunity for him. Michigan State obviously has had the benefit of getting him on campus for the official visit, but Jason took one visit this week. He was just there in Eugene this week. And so on a small window of visits for a lot of guys, maybe hit 4 or 5 schools. Michigan State was hoping to get Jason Brown back on campus this last week. He chose to go to Eugene. So I think that, certainly shows that the Ducks are in there. And I think it's just a matter of, how hard each school and recruit pursue each other there before it ends up a potential match.
Consider this kind of a follow-up to Matt's opening question, kind of revolving around the underclassmen. I've been going to this camp for a while. Matt and Eric have been going longer than but I think I've been going the last 4 years. The last 4 years has been available. It seems like this time around there were a lot of, I would say, more talented, but just better underclassmen. Is that something that you've seen just in camps around the country, and just some guys who stood out? You already mentioned Molden, but there are other guys that I thought were pretty talented out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what makes for me, there's this frequency bias that, kind of comes into play where you start watching guys when they're freshmen, and then by the time they go to their senior year, like, oh, great, another camper. I'm seeing you for the 37th time, and now you're out there competing. But the kind of thing that rejuvenates you is getting the opportunity to see the under guys, the underclassmen, that who am I going to be talking about for the next 2 or 3 years? Who are going to be the names to know the next 2 or 3 years? And I thought that, Saturday Night Live was a plethora of underclassmen. And again, what makes it cool is you get some of those 2027s like Josiah Molden, like Lufa Lomole from Eastside Catholic and Sammamish. But I thought, granted, there was more numbers in the 25s and 26, but the talent really came from the 25 and the 26 class. And, you look at the receiver group. It was a strong receiver group, but I thought for my money that the two best receivers, 1-2 punch for both 2026s in Asa Thompson out of Eastside Catholic and then and Sinai Thomas out of Archbishop Burton. Both have Oregon offers. Both come from schools that, Oregon coaches have recruited well, that Junior Adams has recruited well. Sinai Thomas is kind of an interesting case. His brother plays at Oregon State, but Sinai was at Menlo Atherton last year where he backed up Jurion Dickey. And in the offseason, he transferred to Archbishop Burton, where his coach is Adir Ravapati, who was Troy Franklin's high school coach. And Troy spent a lot of time with Sinai last night because Sinai played with his older brother at Menlo Atherton. And now he knows, hey, you're an Adir guy. I'm going to keep you by. And Junior Adams has had a relationship with those coaches for a long time. So I thought Asa and Sinai both had really good days. And, that's what you love to see at a camp like that. Like, okay, we know who the older guys are. But there's the 26s that, you really want to see, who are that next group that maybe they played some minimal varsity football as a freshman. Maybe they played a lot of varsity football as a freshman, but this is kind of, their coming out year. And there's a couple other 26s that I like. Xavier Owens out of Alamany, RJ Mosley out of Pittsburgh High School in the Bay Area. A school that's had a long history of sending players to University of Oregon, and then Jamison Powell out of Folsom High School. I thought that he had a nice day too. Not the biggest guy in the world. I've seen Jamison at a couple of events this offseason. He was the MVP at the Under Armour camp down in Southern California at receiver in a really big field. And I thought he had a good day. Jalen Lott was another 2026 that I think he was at least one of the few, if only offers that I saw that came out of the camp last night, a 2026 receiver out of Texas. And then that's not to say that the 2025 group wasn't good. Adrian Wilson, who is a Duck commit now, I think he committed, an hour or two after the camp, was committed to TCU, a state of Texas kid. He was there from the other 2025 receivers I locked. Jameer Torres out of King Drew Magnet School in Los Angeles. I thought Landon Kelsey, who originally was from the Vancouver, Washington area, was at Ridgefield High School. He'll play his junior year and senior year at Central Catholic in Portland. I thought he had a good day. Chris Norris, who I saw win wide receiver MVP on back-to-back events back in June, overshadowed a bit by some of his teammates. And then I thought that Adrian Wilson, was another receiver. So it's awesome when the takeaway from an event like that is, man, there are some really good pass catchers out west in the next couple classes. And then some of these national guys that came out, that they showed that they play a little football down to the Lone Star State. A little bit for any Texas.
A little
fans.
bit.
They think, football is not played outside of Texas. It is. In fact, if you live in Houston, you'll get to see a California quarterback leading your NFL team because, Texas has a couple of decent quarterbacks, but California is the state of quarterbacks.
Just a couple. We'll finish up here. I don't know if it changes anything because you just ran through a bunch of them, but you mentioned Adrian Wilson. He did commit to Oregon last night. Was there any players that were there that you feel like in the 25 class that, hey, like maybe a commitment isn't coming soon, but they positioned themselves, Oregon being they, really well? Like, is there a name there that stood out to you or anything else?
Yeah, there's a couple of names, and they're both running back. We talked about Jason Brown, but I thought Jay Sean Lamar, obviously he has ties to Oregon with his brother Jaden being there. Jaden was flanking Jay Sean a little bit. And the thing with Jay Sean is, a lot of times they say your best ability is availability, and what Jay Sean has lacked is availability. He had an injury his sophomore year that cost him the majority of the spring, but he's been to at least 5 different events that I've seen him this June, working his way back. And last night, I thought he looked the most comfortable, the least rusty that he did, and he's poised for a big junior season. Obviously, with his brother being there, there's the familiarity there. Then Autzen Audibles, who's probably going to be the top player in the state of Oregon in the 2026 class. We were all talking last night, like, what is he going to be in 3 years from now? Where is his body going to take him? You figure that out in 3 years from now, but you take a talent like him, especially an in-state talent. I think, Oregon is certainly going to be a factor with him. He does have an offer from Georgia. Tennessee offered as well. But a guy that I think that, depending on how Oregon pushes for him over these next couple of years, I think that they've got a great chance at him. And then I think with Sinai Thomas and Asa Thompson, I know that they're younger guys, so maybe they're not necessarily names to really focus on right now, but those are names certainly to know. I think it was big to get Jakeem Stewart out there. You know, we saw him at Under Armour in April. He came out from Louisiana and was the alpha dog there. So to get him out for that camp, that's huge, because one thing Oregon has done well, probably better than any school in the Pac-12, at least in the last 5-10 years, is recruit nationally and not, shy away from recruiting against the big boys down at the SEC or going into an SEC state. And so I think getting him on campus was huge. And he's a guy that I think Oregon fans should, get familiar with. I think two names that I did mention, Marco Jones and Jonathan Epperson, the 4-star linebackers from California and Washington, respectively. Oregon is very much on kind of their internal short list for them. Jonathan Epperson's a guy that I think that was his 5th visit down to Eugene, even though he lives outside Seattle. He's originally from Maryland, so he is not a West Coast guy by nature, but he grew up watching Oregon football. So, that shows the national brand certainly have. So those are a couple of the names that I would say keep an eye on. And then the 2024 class, the majority of the guys are committed, but, depending on where they go, if they decide to offer one more interior offensive lineman, a kid that I think that they would have an excellent chance at, and his teammates already committed, is Terrell Kim out of North Medford High School. Pound for pound might be the best interior lineman out west in terms of what he's produced and shown. But he's a true interior guy. Oregon State had him on campus for an official visit, and they're bringing in some interior offensive linemen. Obviously, Oregon already has Devin Brooks as kind of an interior guy, but if they decide to make a late offer to an interior lineman, then I think Terrell Kim could be a guy that Oregon fans need to get familiar with, especially with him and AJ Pugliano being very tight.
It's going to do it for us here with Brandon Huffman here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Brandon, thank you for your time. Good to catch up with you once again. I'm sure we will see you in a couple of months when we go up to Seattle for that UW game. Might see you there, maybe. We'll see.
But potentially I'll be there. But yes, I will definitely be seeing you guys. I got my takeaways and my notebook coming out here later on Thursday, so keep a lookout on that. Just compliment your guys' outstanding piece that you guys got up last night. I had a little bit of a drive last night, so I needed to.
Yeah,
just a little. Take your time.
Get my beauty sleep.
Yeah, exactly. That's all you need.
Thanks, Brandon.
All right, thanks a lot, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, fellas.